What is up, everyone? I'm Rusty, your local laboratory maniac, and this is Labman EDH. Are you sick and tired of playing the same old decks at Commander Nights? Do you want to impress your friends with some of the new Lorwyn cards that you cracked in a pack? Well, that's the goal of this video. Lorwyn is coming out, and it drops some really awesome cards. So let's build around some of the cards and mechanics of the set. Deck list will be down below. Timestamps for each deck will also be down below. Now, put a Negua counter on one of your creatures, and let's jump into the decks. The most popular commander by far, according to EDH Rec, from this set is High Perfect Morcant. Now, Elf Tribal is the obvious way to go, and if you go to EDH Rec, that's kind of how everyone's going. Some go Infect Root or something like that. But I don't think that aggressive nature is how to best utilize her abilities. And I'll explain what we're going to do with this deck if the title hasn't already. Let me read her in case you missed her, and then we'll get into it. She's a 4-mana Kagari legendary creature, Elf Noble. When she or another elf you control enters, each opponent blights 1. Blight's a new ability that says your opponent chooses a creature they control and puts a neg 1 counter on it, so they get to choose. And then you can tap 3 untapped elves you control to proliferate, activate only as a sorcery, and she's a 4/4. So I want to use elves only for their utility abilities like draw, token production, and mana ramp, and then tap them for her last ability to proliferate planeswalker loyalty counters. That's the theme of this deck. Like you can tell from the title of the deck, elves players don't have super friends. I love planeswalkers, so this is an interesting way to go about that. And her Negwin ability to me does not scream elf aggro or elf ball aggro, however you want to call it. It screams control, and planeswalkers do that way better than normal elf decks. Quick lore tidbit about elves. On Lorwyn, they have a strange society structure. It's based around beauty. The more beautiful you are, the higher ranking you are. They also have strange kind of standards for beauty. Now, there's a few ranks in their society. The flawless is at the bottom, then the immaculate, then the exquisite, and then the perfects. They call themselves the Blessed Nation, ruled by high perfects. Now, currently, High Perfect Morcant is one of them. She claims the position. She is also depicted as a central antagonist. She helps lead an army of elves through manipulation and her beauty. Just to compare to make this kind of evident, because when people see elf decks, they think aggro, playing a lot of lords, and then winning by overrunning the opponent with you build so much mana, and then you pump that into an ability that is an overrun effect. So it gets +3/+3 or +X/+X. Now that's not the theme of this deck. I'm doing a more control, a more slow burn, and the ultimate goal is to ultimate one of our planeswalkers. That means use its last ability that will usually either win the game or put you in such a position that you basically win the game. Funny enough, there are multiple elf planeswalkers that have abilities related to elves, like Tyvar Kell, who is a 4-mana green planeswalker, has 3 activated abilities and a static ability. The static ability says elves you control have tap, add a black. And then it's a +1 ability is put a +1/+1 counter on one target elf, untap it, it gains death touch until end of turn. Then 0 ability is create a 1/1 green elf warrior creature token, and its -6 is you get an emblem with. Whenever you cast an elf spell, it gains haste until end of turn, and you draw 2 cards, and he starts at 3 loyalty. Then you got Nissa Ravain, which is a 4-mana green planeswalker. She has 3 abilities. Her +1 we're not really going to use. It searches for a card named Nissa's Chosen and puts it onto the battlefield and then shuffles. You could put that in the deck if you wanted. However, her +1 ability, our other +1 ability is you gain 2 life for each elf you control, which I really like. And our -7 is search your library for any number of elf creature cards and put them onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library, and she starts at 2 loyalty. So that ultimate will be pretty good. They mana ramp, they produce tokens, they draw you gain they gain you life. Their ultimates basically put you in a great position. They don't automatically win the game though. Here are a few planeswalkers that really either end the game or kill an opponent. So If you use them multiple times, of course, it'll kill all your opponents. So Vraska Betrayal Sting. Now, she is a 6 mana black legendary planeswalker. She has completed, so you can pay 2 life instead of 1 of her black, but she comes in with less loyalty counters. She has a 0 ability that draws and proliferates. She has a -2 that turns something into a treasure, which is kind of crazy. And then a -9 that says, if target player has fewer than 9 poison counters, they get a number of poison counters equal to the difference. She starts at a 6, so you proliferate her a couple times. You can ultimate her, and then of course your commander will proliferate to make them have 10. So that's pretty good. It knocks out an opponent essentially. Liliana Dreadhorde General has kind of a way meaner ability. Now, she can draw you cards with her static ability. She makes someone sacrifice or makes each player sacrifice 2 creatures. She can also produce tokens, but that -9 is kind of intense. It says each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifices the rest. She starts at 6, so she needs to gain 3 before she can ultimate. However, that leaves them with 1 land, 1 creature, and it's each opponent, unlike Vraska, which is target player, so it can get kind of brutal. Obviously, elves are going to be mainly mana ramp because planeswalkers cost a lot. So turn 3, you could start pumping out some pretty big planeswalkers with the right amount of mana producing elves. So I'm not going to go over all of them, but I did want to point out what they did. They did a really cool thing where obviously they have Llanowar elves. He was from the Alpha set, of course, so he's been around for ages. But then during Modern Horizons, they made Llanowar Tribe, which costs 3 times the amount, produces 3 times the mana, and the power and toughness is 3 times. So it's literally just 3 Llanowar elves put together. Outside of mana ramp, we have a good toolbox of creatures to maintain the board state, to get out walkers and keep them protected. Leaf Crowned Visionary is a lord, but it draws you cards when you cast an elf spell if you pay 1 green. Elvish War Master creates 1/1 green elf warrior creature tokens when an elf ETBs. Selfless Safe Right is a flash elf, so you can cast at instant speed when it ETBs. All elves you control get hexproof and indestructible. And then Reclamation Sage, this is a classic. It ETBs to destroy an artifact or enchantment. Now, 2 things you definitely want to put in an elf deck or a deck that kind of swarms the battlefield are when a creature dies, draw a card effects. That way, if you're board wiped, you can refill your hand and redeploy your army. This doesn't work as good for token based decks because most of them say non token. Morbid Opportunist is an example that it does care about tokens, but it only triggers once each turn. So keep that in mind, but you want that and you want some kind of mass recursion effects. Now, protection is nice, but mass recursion is sometimes better. You don't have to hold up mana for it. So, for an example, for something that draws you cards when things die in this deck, you got Skimfar Avenger, which is a 2 mana black elf berserker. Whenever another non token elf or berserker you control dies, you draw the card and lose 1 life, and it's a 3/1. Now, normally I say add 1 or 2 mass recursion spells to your deck. Almost every archetype can benefit from that, whether you're an artifact, instant or sorcery, or creature based deck. Now, for this deck, I would actually put 4 or 5 different ones. Some of our planeswalkers actually do it. I think we have 2 Lilianas that have effects kind of like a Rise of the Dark Realm effect. But also, you got stuff like Living Death, Patriarch's Bidding, Twilight's Call, Haunting Voyage, or this new one that's actually coming out in this set, Bloodline Bidding, which is obviously a reference to Patriarch's Bidding. It's an 8 mana black sorcery, has Convoke, and then you choose a creature type. Return all creature cards of the chosen type from your graveyard to the battlefield, which is better than Patriarch's Bidding because it doesn't give your opponents an option to do that, and it has Convoke, so it could be free for you. Funny enough, I made a video about lore and deck builds around old Phyrexia, and one of the decks had Volrath the Shape Stealer as the commander. And this was before they even revealed Blight was going to be an ability. And I built a deck around giving your own stuff neg 1 counters to represent how Yawgmoth tested on his own populace while he was kind of exiled in Phyrexia. Well, what do you know? They came out with Blight, which cares about neg 1 counters. But not only that, but about putting them on your own creatures. So unfortunately, I did so much research for this deck when building it, but now it's kind of even more powerful because of Blight. I would have saved time if I waited a couple of months, unfortunately, but it is what it is. I had fun making the deck, and that's what I want to talk about in this video. I want to talk about the deck. I will have a deck list down below. And if you did see the first video with this deck, it has been updated with all the new cards. Now, for the deck, I used Volrath, the Shape Stealer, but the commander for the precon that actually cares about neg 1 counters going on your own stuff is Anti-Ul. So I kept it Volrath because I wanted to use blue. I thought that'd be more unique than the precon. But I'm going to include some stuff that you could throw in the precon as well if that's something you're interested in. Now, Volrath, the Shape Stealer, is a 5-mana Sultai-legendary creature shapeshifter. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a neg 1 counter on up to 1 target creature. Then you can pay 1 until your next turn. Volrath becomes a copy of target creature with a counter on it, except it's a 7/5 and it has this ability. Now, the Blight ability is associated with goblins in particular because they love various sensation, the good, the bad, and the painful. They often share those experiences, and that helps keep a cohesive society. Their society is ran as a matriarchy. The leader is called an auntie. The precon had one of the said leaders, like I said, but the first ever commander deck I ever made when I was 19 years old, that seems like a lifetime ago, was Wart Bogart Ante. So I actually have a special connection to the Lorwyn goblins. Now, I kind of wish the precon was out when I first made this deck. It would have saved me a lot of research. But when I was doing my research, I was looking for cards that mentioned counters. I had to go through a billion +1/+1 counter specific cards until I reached enough to make a deck with. But we actually have some really good options here. Just for draw engines, for example, you got Nakira Lair Scavenger, which has Menace and says whenever another creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had 1 or more counters on it, you draw a card and lose a life. It doesn't specify what kind of counter. Then you got Generous Patron. It gives you draw when you place a counter on a creature you don't control. Now, I do believe that one is in the precon. I don't think the Lair Scavenger was, though. Danny Pink is a Doctor Who card, and it's obviously not in the precon because it's blue, and it's $20 now, so it's half the cost of a precon, actually. It's a blue legendary creature with Mentor, and it gives creatures you control the ability that states, whenever 1 or more counters are put on this creature for the first time each turn, you draw a card. And then you got Cleopatra Exiled Pharaoh. Now, she was actually made for +1/+1 counters, and her first ability is related to that. It says at the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target legendary creatures. But her last ability is what we want. It says, whenever a legendary creature with counters on it dies, draw a card for each counter on it, you lose 2 life, and she's a 2/4. Now, these cards will draw you so much. Our draw engine in this deck is going to be one of its greatest strengths. Protection and recursion will also be a great strength of this deck, focusing again on that any type of counters. You got Ripples of Potential. Now, this is one of my favorites. It proliferates and then phases out any number of permanents with counters on them that you control. Now, that's going to be really good in a Planeswalker deck if you had a Planeswalker deck with counters, because it just says permanents, not just creatures. Same thing with Mutational Advantage, really good in Super Friends. It also proliferates, and it gives permanents with counters you control hexproof and indestructible, and then fogs all damage to them. Now, this is going to be good because a lot of our creatures are going to be weaker because of the neg 1 counters. Fire Nation Salvagers has Menace and puts a +1/+1 counter on something. And then when a creature you control with a counter deals combat damage to a player, you get any creature from their graveyard and put it into play under your control. This is a super slept on card. I think this is like 20 cents. It's a 20-cent rare. People are really sleeping on that. And then you got Puka's Covenant. It's a new precon card. It's a 3-mana green enchantment. It says, whenever a creature you control with a counter on it dies, you may return another target permanent card with mana value less than or equal to the number of counters on that creature from the graveyard to your hand. Do this only once each turn. So as you're killing your creatures with the -1 day 1 counters, you can replace them by putting something in your hand, which is pretty nice. Just kind of explaining how my deck process works and how my brain works. I actually got this idea. Of course, you can apply it to the Phyrexian lore, and I did that, like I said. However, I first thought about it when I was reading the Ozolith for a deck I built for a patron about Hebe, the panda spirit from Avatar. And I was the Ozolith does something similar to Hebe. So the Ozolith has the ability, says whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, if it had counters on it, you could put those counters on the Ozolith. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you may move all counters from it onto another target creature. So, of course, the whole goal of this deck was to put -1 counters on my creatures, and then when they die, I put them on the Ozolith. And then it says you can move them on a target creature, not just a creature you own. So you can weaponize it. You can like infest all your creatures with -1 counters and then move them all to your opponent's stuff. And of course, like you saw, we're doing other things with those counters. So it can be removal, and we also benefit in other ways from it. And that's what really originated this deck idea for me. But like I said, this was before Blight came out. Now Blight's a thing. So this deck is even more powerful. Now, one card I built around, I actually made a Patreon video. I have a Patreon account. It has a free membership and then it has a paid tier. I make videos for the paid tiers and sometimes for the free members. So check this one out if you're interested in it. I'm not going to go into it for this video, but it's around oft-nabbed goat. Now, for this deck, I did put this guy in because it says whenever this creature dies, if it had one or more -1 counters on it, the owner draws that many cards and each other player loses that much life. So if you're building up the -1 counters on the Ozolith and then you put it on off-nabbed goat, bang bada boom, you are going to be doing a lot of damage and drawing a lot of cards. I really like off-nabbed goat. It's one of those cards that you just see and it's so unique you have to build around. Go to my Patreon, is the link should be down below. Check it out if you're interested. Here are two cards you can throw in the precon if you bought it. They're very effective. Mikaeus the Unhallowed is a 6-mana black legendary creature and zombie cleric. As Intimidate, whenever a human deals damage to you, destroy it. And then other non-human creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Undying, and he's a 5/5. So how is this good for our commander in our deck? Well, Mikaeus the Unhallowed gives them Undying. So when they die, they come back with a +1/+1 counter. But there's a rules, and I'll do a quick rules lawyer here. When a permanent has both a +1/+1 counter and a -1 counter on it, they kind of cancel each other out as a state-based action. Now, so basically, how it'll work is it'll come back with a +1/+1 counter. You can use various ways, like your commander, to get that -1 counter on that creature. So it removes the +1/+1. It dies again. Undying says, hey, if it doesn't have a +1/+1 counter, you bring it on back. So you bring it on back, you put a -1 counter, removing the +1/+1, and you just keep going. You can kind of not go infinite, but it's just high synergy and high value. Now, Vanti Ildal is another one you could throw in the deck. It's a 4-mana Golgari legendary creature human warrior. You can tap him. Target creature's power and toughness becomes 1 until end of turn. It's a 3/3. So naturally, if its toughness is 1, you could put one -1 counter on it and bang bada boom, it dies. Now remember, we want counters on our own creatures, but there is no rule saying we can't put them on our opponent's creatures. That is going to be another way to control the board. And just like Yawgmoth, just like the goblins, we want to share the disease. We want to share the blight with our opponents. This deck is called Can't Be Countered, and it revolves around Hexing Squelcher, who has actually been getting a lot of hype because it has what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines of rules or abilities, and it's only 2 mana. That's kind of intense. It's a 2-mana red goblin sorcerer, which I don't think sorcerer is that common. Why is it in a wizard? I'm not sure. This spell can't be countered. It has ward pay to life. Spells you control can't be countered. And then other creatures you control have ward pay to life, and it's a 2/2. And that isn't the only 2 mana red creature that has come out recently that does this. In the Spider-Man set, they had Spider Punk. He made a lot of buzz when he came out. He's a 2 mana red legendary creature, Spider Human Hero, has Riot. Other spiders you control have Riot. Spells and abilities can't be countered, and then damage can't be prevented. It's a 2/1. So, how exactly are we going to utilize this ability? We're going to focus around these two enchantments here. You got Dovescape, which is a 6 mana Azorius enchantment. It says, whenever a player casts a non creature spell, counter that spell. That player creates X 1/1 white and blue bird creature tokens with flying, where X is that spell's CMC. Now, this is a really interesting ability. There's also Ice Cave, which isn't as heavily focused on in the deck. We really built around Dovescape, but Ice Cave is also good. It's a 5 mana blue enchantment. Whenever a player plays a spell, any other player may pay that spell's mana cost. If that player does, counter that spell. And yeah, you have to also play the color. So, how this works is you have Hexing Squelcher. It makes it so our non creature spells can't be countered. But the token ability doesn't say on Dovescape if you do. So, you will still get the 1/1 bird tokens and your spell won't be countered. That's amazing. And those tokens are 1/1 white and blue birds with flying, which we're going to build around. But our opponent will also have birds. Unless they only cast creatures, then I guess they won't have birds, but they're going to get desperate. I've played this a variation of this deck before. They're going to get desperate and want to be able to block your birds, so they're going to try to make their own birds. And don't worry, you will definitely get the Dovescape because that's step one of our plan is to get the Dovescape. We actually have 7 tutors that can get it for us. Okay, you got the Dovescape out. That's excellent. So, what are we going to be doing now? You're going to be casting spells, getting a bunch of birds, but your opponent is a well, let's assume they're a spell slinger deck or an enchantment deck or an artifact deck. They're going to be pumping out more birds than you could. But what are we going to do? Well, the whole deck is kind of built for this exact situation. I want to get Dovescape out, and if my opponents happen to outpace me with birds, they're not going to benefit too much from it. Here are 8 cards that do something that make it so I benefit way more from the birds than my opponents. You got Massacre Worm that ETPs to give your opponent's creatures -2, -2, and then when a creature dies for them, they lose 2 life. Well, okay, they have 10 birds. Oh, they're all dead, and now you, you lose 20 life. Then you got Archetype of Imagination. It takes away the birds flying that your opponents control, so only your birds have flying. So you can still swing in, and there's not this huge blocking situation. Soul Warden and Soul's Attendant gives us life when their birds come in, so it kind of nullifies their first attack if they were to attack you. Weftstalker Ardent lets us do damage whenever our birds ETB, which is pretty nice. It's a possible game ender. Thistledown Liege boosts our burst +2/+2 because remember, they're white and blue, and it makes them 3 times bigger than our opponent's birds. So we can swing in and they'll have to block one of our birds with 3 other birds just to kill it. Now, Blood Reckoning drains our opponent whenever they attack per creature. So if they have a whole army of birds and very little life, they're kind of out of luck. And the Revenge of the Ravens, it's such a flavorful card for a bird deck. It drains our opponents 1 and gains us 1 when they attack us. So it kind of is even worse for them to attack us because not only are we just gaining the life that they would do, they're also losing life. So they're definitely not going to attack if you have Revenge of Ravens on the field. Of course, we're going to be playing around the bird and flying tribal. We want to nerf our opponent's birds, but we also want to boost ours. Balmor, Battle Mage Captain, lets you boost your creatures +1/+0 and give them trample whenever you cast a non-creature spell. Hyperion Eagle and Thunderclap Wyvern boost your flyers, which is nice. Kangi, whenever your birds attack with them, they get +2/+0. Whenever they block with them, they get +0/+2, which is really nice. Castrol, the Wind Crested, gives them +1/+1 counters, lets you draw, and also will actually cheat out birds for you. Soulcatcher's Airy, when a bird dies, you put a feather counter on it, and then your birds get +1/+1 for each feather cut. So as we're using our bird tokens to block, they die, this gets counters, boosting our other birds. Ishai, Ojutai, Dragon Speaker, and Vile Smasher the Fierce are the commanders for this deck. Now, mainly because the colors. I just wanted a partner that give me 4 colors. Ishai is a bird, and it's actually a pretty powerful bird. It says whenever an opponent casts a spell, put a +1/+1 counter on it, which is going to make it huge. It starts as a 1/1, but it's going to get big. Vile Smasher the Fierce. It's kind of incidental damage that could end up helping you win the game. The first spell you cast, you choose an opponent at random, and he deals damage to that player equal to the CMC of what you cast. But they're not huge parts of the deck. Like I said, I just want the colors. I really want them to make more 4 color commanders that aren't like the Omnath colors. I want them to make some of these. That would be pretty interesting. So this next deck is around Mirrorform, a freaking broken card that has so many crazy applications. You could do so much with this card. I actually did something cool for it. I'll show you here in a second. It is a 6 mana blue instant. Each non-land permanent you control becomes a copy of target non-aura permanent. Oh my god, that can get crazy. There's a reason I call this deck the Maze of Mirrors, because I built it around Maze of Ith, one of my favorite older cards. It's a land, doesn't have a mana ability, but it taps to untap target attacking creature, prevent all combat damage that would be dealt to and dealt by that creature this turn. So we get a bunch of tokens out or other kinds of permanents, doesn't even matter. Then we use mirror form to kind of make them all Maze of Iths. Now, if you have 10 or more Maze of Iths and your opponent happens not to have hexproof, which we have cards in here, by the way, to get around that, like Shadow Spear or Arcane Lighthouse or Detection, or was it Detection Lighthouse or something like that? We have options to get rid of hexproof, but they will not be able to attack unless they have like infinite tokens or something, because we'll just be fogging left and right. They won't even try to attack us. There are 2 ways I built this deck. Both deck links are down below. One uses Alinda and Azor, which obviously is an Esper commander, and I thought Esper landfall deck would be an interesting take for this. I also made a Tamir deck with Iro Grand Lotus, more powerful, less unique, but still pretty cool. If you don't know, Alindra and Azor is a 6 mana Esper legendary creature, Vampire Knight Sphinx. What a combo. Has flying and war too. Whenever it attacks, you may pay X in Esper mana. If you do, draw X cards. At the beginning of each instep, you may pay 4 life. And if you do, create a number of 1/1 black Vampire Knight creature tokens with lifelink equal to the number of cards you've drawn this turn, and it's a 6/6. Now, this is each instep, which is kind of crazy, but we're going to be making a lot of Vampire Knight tokens. One thing I love when I'm choosing a commander is if it has a draw engine attached to it, that saves me a lot of trouble in deck building, because you have to focus at least 10% of your deck on draw engines. So having it in your command zone, always having access to it, kind of lets you play a little bit less draw engines so you can focus more on something else. Also, the token production with our mirror form is going to be amazing. We're going to make so many mazes. Our opponents are going to be lost in the maze. Now, speaking of tokens, we have plenty of ways to create them. Retreat to Emeria has a landfall ability that gives us 1/1 core ally creature tokens, and then boost our creatures +1/+1 until end of turn. We have to choose one. And then Feldar Retreat is just an upgraded version of that. It has 2 landfall abilities that we can choose one for. It either makes 2/2 cats or gives +1/+1 counters. Amira Angel gives a landfall ability that has 1/1 flying birds produced, which is pretty nice. Curse of Relentless Dead is a curse, so you have to enchant it to something. I suggest enchanting yourself. And then when you play lands, you get a bunch of 2/2 decayed zombies. And then obviously you know about Field of the Dead. It's a game changer. It gives us 2/2 zombies as well. They don't have decayed though. Now, we technically have almost 2 secret commanders in this deck. So our tutors are kind of split. We have some that get instants or sorceries like Waterlogged Teachings, which could also double as a land because it's one of those 2-sided cards. And then you got stuff that gets specific lands out, not just basics. World Map, Expedition Map, Weathered Wayfarer, Urza's Cave. There's a bunch, even in Esper colors. And of course, you got black in here. So you can put the demonic tutors, the vampiric tutors, whatever you want to put in here to get them out. While you're waiting to get 1,000 Maze of Iths, maybe you only have one. Well, something like Silent Arbiter, which is pretty good for this deck, it's a 4 mana artifact creature. No more than one creature can attack each combat, and no more than one creature can block each combat. It's a 1/5. So if they attack you with their one creature, you just Maze of Ith it. They waste their attack. They're not even going to try to attack you because of that. For this deck, I replaced one of the board wipes with Asinine Antics. Now, I love this card in blue decks because it nerfs your opponent's creatures. They all get Cursed Roll enchantment auras placed on them and they become 1/1s. They still keep their abilities though. However, since you're putting so many tokens out there, you can change those tokens with Mirror Form to your Maze of Ith or whatever you turn it into. So it gets you more permanents to turn with the Mirror Form. Now, this deck is actually pretty powerful. If you haven't played against a Maze of Ith deck, it can get kind of brutal. But maybe we want it to get more brutal. Will Breaker is a really good card to do that because it says when you target, when a creature an opponent controls becomes a target of a spell or ability you control, gain control of that creature for as long as you control Will Breaker. It's a 2/3. So you target it something with Maze of Ith. If it's attacking, you remember it only can target an attacking creature, but your opponent will not want to attack even your other opponents because they'll be afraid you're going to be taking their creature. Horobi Death's Whale is another really mean one. It says whenever a creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, destroy that creature. So our Maze of Ith doesn't become a fog, it now becomes a kill spell, which is pretty powerful. Now, for the Tamir version of the deck, and I will say this is the more powerful one, but I think Esper Landfall is probably a little more unique. Iroh Grand Lotus, if you don't know, is a 6 mana Tamir legendary creature, human noble ally. Has firebending too. And then during each turn, each non-lesson instant and sorcery card in your graveyard has flashback. The flashback cost is equal to that card's mana cost. And then during your turn, each lesson card in your graveyard has flashback 1. It's 5/5. That last ability won't be something we're going to be focusing around. Of course, we really care about our instant or non instance having flashback so we can cast Mirror Form multiple times, but we will have a few lessons in the deck. Now, there are a few advantages of using these color pairings. One, uh, is you could do a few extra lands to target with Mist Form. It doesn't just have to be Maze of Ith. For example, Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. When a mountain enters the battlefield, if you control at least 5 other mountains, you may have it deal 3 damage to target creature or player. Now, that can become a game ender. Let's say you have 10 tokens or 10 permanents, you turn them all to Valakut, and then you play your 6th mountain, which we put all the mountain dual lands in this deck. We built kind of around this and Maze of Ith. You can do 30 damage to an opponent, which could easily knock them out, or you can clear the board if they have too much life or what have you. There's so many applications for it. And of course, we're in green, so we can play the Dryad of Elysian Grove. It kind of makes it so all of our lands are all basic land types, which makes them mountains, of course. There are also countless spells in green that can search out specific lands, not just basics. Sylvan Scrying, obviously, is an example of this. 2 mana green sorcery that searches for a land, puts into your hand. And we also have a lot of spells that get you lands from your graveyard. Assuming your opponent has some kind of land destruction, they might have a Beast Within, Generous Gift. Those do destroy lands. Ghostly Quarters, Wasteland, Strip Mine, etc. You could, of course, play Crucible of Worlds in every single deck because it is a colorless artifact. But since we have green, we have some really good ones. Ice Till Explorer is a 4 mana green insect scout. You may play an additional land on your turn. You may play lands from your graveyard. And when a land enters the battlefield, you can mill a card into 2/4. And green has a lot of landfall doublers. Now, there's some ETB doublers like Elish Norn that you could put in a Esper landfall deck if you wanted. Green just has some really good ones. Ancient Green Warden is an amazing one. It's a 6-mana green elemental with reach. You may play lands from your graveyard. Really nice. If a lane entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time, and it's a 5/7. You can also play a lot of copy abilities. Green giving us access to Doppelgang, which is an XXX green and blue sorcery. For each of X target permanents, create X tokens of those copies of those permanents. Oh my god. If you target a mountain and a Valakut with this, you will be destroying people left and right. One of my favorite plays in a deck like this, and I actually own this, I actually stumbled upon this play accidentally, is a Realms Uncharted kind of play. So it's a 3-mana green instant. Search your library for 4 lane cards with different names and reveal them. An opponent chooses 2 of those cards. Put the chosen ones into the graveyard and put the rest into your hand, and then shuffle your library. Actually made a similar one, Elemental Teachings, which is a 5-mana instant, but it's a lesson, and it puts them directly into play, whichever your opponents decide to put into play. So, okay, you cast Realms Uncharted or Elemental Teachings. You want to choose 2 utility lands like Valakut the Molten Pinnacle or Maze of Ith. Then you want to choose Echoing Deeps, and that's important. Hopefully that one's still in your deck when you play this. Then you want to play a land copying ability like Vesuva or Thespian Stage. You also, what's it called? Shifting Woods could be a replacement for Echoing Deeps if you have it in the deck. Now, you choose these, your opponent won't have an option to give you a bad choice. Because if they send both the utility lands to the graveyard, you just play Echoing Deeps, copying one, and then the copy land to copy that. So you will always get 2 of you, either 2 copies of one of the utility lands or both the utility lands. It's amazing. Your opponents first won't realize it, but they'll slowly start to realize they have no good choice. Sometimes when a new set comes out, you see a card and you're like, oh, I want to build around that. Curious Colossus was one of those cards for me. It's a 7-mana giant warrior. Whenever this creature enters, each creature target opponent controls loses all abilities, becomes a coward in addition to its other types, and has base power and toughness 1/1, and it's a 7/7. This is a powerful ability, and honestly, I love transmutation abilities in Magic, and that means when something is turned into something worse. And this actually isn't the first mention of a coward or a card that cares about the coward ability that we're going to throw in the deck. Giants on Lorwyn are brutish, territorial, and stubborn. They are the primarily in Naya based colors and mostly red and white. But when Shadowmoor happened, they also were red and green. Giants are viewed as a problem by the populace of the plane, more like a natural disaster, because they will walk wherever they want, rarely taking into account who's under their foot. They sleep for long periods of time, and they also live for long periods of time. Moss and plant life actually grow on them, which kind of makes them even more of a natural disaster. Now, they live so long that the change between Shadowmoor and Morningtide really doesn't really matter to them. They don't really take it into account. Some people think they're immortal, but they're not. Boldweir Intimidator is a 7-mana giant warrior. It says cowards can't block warriors. And then you can pay a red, target creature becomes a coward until end of turn. Then you can pay 3, target creature becomes a warrior until end of turn, and it's a 5/5. That's pretty good. And this actually is kind of a running theme in this kind of ability, because Gornog the Red Reaper is a 3-mana red legendary creature Minotaur warrior. Has haste. Warriors can't be blocked by cowards. And whenever one or more warriors you control attack a player, target creature that player controls becomes a coward. And then attacking warriors you control get a +X+0, where X is the number of cowards your opponents control. And it's a 2/3. So that's a pretty powerful ability. We don't have every creature be a warrior, but we have plenty of warriors in the deck. The commander for this deck is Bree of Clan Stout Arm. She's a 4 mana Boros legendary creature, giant warrior. You can pay 2 tap her. Another target creature you control gains flying and lifelink until end of turn. Then at the beginning of your end step, if you gain life this turn, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost if the spell's mana value is less than or equal to the amount of life you gain this turn. Otherwise, put it into your hand. It's a 4/4. So she's a Boros commander that's pretty good card advantage, which is not very typical for Boros. Usually you have to stuff the deck full of it just to get it to work. And her ability to give flying and lifelink will be great because we have a giant sub theme. Bree of Clan Stout Arm is an abnormal type of giantess. Instead of being a hot tempered force of nature, she's a gentle giantess. Known for her mild nature, tending sheep, and her lair becoming the target of greedy bogarts seeking riches in the shifting darkness of Shadowmoor. Her whole story centers around her kindness reflected against the darkness of Shadowmoor. Now, another theme of this deck is blinking or flickering, which goes well with Curious Colossus because if you blink him, we can choose another opponent to target to turn all their stuff into cowards. Or if your opponent, we targeted them, turned everything into coward, and they somehow blinked it or they somehow got a bunch of new creatures, we can target them again, keeping them down, keeping them a coward. They're going to fear us, of course, because we're such intimidating. Bree's such an intimidating giantess. So, Eerie Interlude, Flicker of Fate are just a few examples. I like the mass flicker effects, especially when they flicker them at the end of the turn, because they can also act as protection spells. We're going to invest a lot of mana into our giants. It would suck if we had 3 or 4 giants and they get board wipe and a lot of our work is kind of gone. But with Eerie Interlude, it kind of exiles them, and then at the end of the turn, after the board wipe has resolved, it comes back, which I kind of like. Now, what I didn't realize before I was making this deck is giants, a lot of them have ETB effects. And that kind of makes sense flavor wise. If I was battling you and we were both planeswalkers and you summoned a freaking giant, I would expect it to impact the board state right there, whether it creates a crater and an earthquake or blah, blah, blah. So it kind of makes sense. Now I'm going to go over a few of the ETB effects that we have in this deck. And as I do, just imagine constantly blinking them, how crazy it will be. Giant Harbinger, ETBs and tutors a giant onto the top of your library, so it gets our secret commander, but many others. Cloud Goat Ranger ETBs, it makes 3/1/1 Kithkin tokens, and then you can tap 3 Kithkins to make it him +1 or +2/+0 and flying, which makes sense because they have flying goats, which is pretty cool. Fearbolg Flutus ETBs and steals a creature, gives it haste and myriad. Hearth Cage, giant ETBs. It makes 2/3/1 elementals. And then you can sack the elemental to boost a giant +3/+0. Hamletback Goliath itself doesn't have an ETB trigger, but when another creature enters, it gets X +1/+1 counters equal to that creature's power. And it's any creature, not just your own. Keep that in mind. It's going to get huge. Now, Infernal Titan has fire breathing, and ETBs do 3 damage however you want to split it. Then Sun Titan, as you know, ETBs to get a permanent of 3 CMC or less from your graveyard. Everyone knows that one because it comes in every single precon. And then Thunder Clown Shaman, or Thunder Cloud Shaman, not Clown Shaman. Oh, that would be terrifying, a giant clown. It ETBs and deals damage to each non-giant equal to the number of giants you control. Now, imagine giving him lifelink and he does 3 damage to like 10 creatures or something like that, and you gain 30 life. And remember, your commander can activate her ability at instant speed. It's not sorcery speed, so you can respond to the ETB trigger. Or like Inferno Titan, that would work. That would work with a lot of these guys. You're going to gain a lot of life. Since a lot of our creatures are going to be pretty large and we're going to be blinking them, I fit as many as I could enchantments or creatures that deal damage equal to the power of something entering your battlefield. Now, imagine having one of these and blinking a bunch of giants. It's going to be pretty good. Warstorm Surge is probably one of the best ones. It's also cost the most CMC wise. It's an enchantment that says whenever a creature you control enters, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Now, Terror of the Peaks does this too, but it's a 5/4 dragon. And then you got Pandemonium. It's an enchantment that does this, but it's for any creature entering. So your opponent can use it. So you got to use this one pretty wisely. Now, Electropotence is probably one of the worst ones. You actually have to pay 3 mana when a creature you control enters the battlefield, then it can do damage, which is kind of a downside. I much rather have Warstorm Surge out over all of these. And one last thing about these. Okay, they say the creature is the one doing damage. So you could give that thing lifelink in response to gain some life with it. The only exception is Terror of the Peaks. It's the one doing damage. So if you mass blink and have Terror of the Peaks out, you give him lifelink, and then he does all the damage and you gain that much life. Now, one fun combo you can do with another new giant that's coming out in this set, Goliath Daydreamer, which is a 4 mana red giant wizard. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell from your hand, you exile that card with a dream counter on it instead of putting it into the graveyard. Whenever this creature attacks, you may cast a spell from among the cards you own in exile with dream counters on them without paying their mana cost, and he's a 4/4. You can essentially recast your blinking spells multiple times. And even if you blink Goliath Daydreamer, the way the ability works is it's any creature, or sorry, any card exiled with a dream counter on it, not one it exiled. So as long as it stays in exile with a dream counter, you can recast it even if you blink it. Or you can go infinite attacks, assuming your card doesn't die, with something like Full Throttle. You play Full Throttle, it gets exiled with a dream counter. You attack with Goliath Daydreamer, casting that Full Throttle again, and you just keep going and going and going. Imagine giving him lifelink as well. One consideration to take in when building this deck is that tutoring out Curious Colossus will be a bit hard for these colors. If you wanted, you could add green to the deck or black. It would make it easier to tutor them out, but you'd of course have to choose a different color. Here's some ways you can tutor in this deck, especially for your Colossus. You got Planar Bridge. It'll tutor it right to the battlefield, but for 8 mana. Gamble is probably one of the better ones if you have a full hand. It's a 1 mana, can get any card put into your hand, but you have to discard a card at random, which you could discard your commander, or sorry, your Colossus, but we have an option to bring that back. You also have Pyre of Heroes. It's a birthing pod effect for your tribe, which will be giant for this deck. So you have to have a 6 mana giant out like Sun Titan and then sacrifice it to go get the Colossus. You got Fervent Mastery, which is literally just 3 gambles in one. You get 3 cards and discard 3 cards at random. And then you got something to get out your enchantments, Moon Blessed Cleric, which also is an ETB trigger. So you can blink it, get out multiple of your enchantments that do damage. So as you blink, you're just taking out, you're sniping things left and right. Thanks so much for watching till the end of the video. Quick shout out to my paid patrons, Who's Neil, Brooke, Brody, and Matt. I appreciate your support. Now, spoiler season is one of my favorites because I just go ham on deck building. Unfortunately, this season was only 1 week. Like they revealed all the spoilers within a week, which was kind of annoying because I would like to build even more decks around it for my channel. And there's also new lore, which I really like. So it's almost a win-win in my book. What do you think of the decks I made for this video? Are you going to be building any decks around Lorwyn characters, cards, or strategies? Let me know in the comments down below. And until next time, I'll be seeing you guys.